welcome back to the Zero Hour. This is Richard RJ Eskow, and during this period of political turmoil, there are some things that have not changed. One of them is that we remain incarceration nation. We have more people in prison here in this country than anywhere else on the planet, if I have my statistics correct. And it remains a major crisis in this country. Here to talk about that with us now is Jessica Jackson Sloan. Jessica is the national director and the co-founder of an organization called Cut 50, that's CUT50, which is hoping to, let's put it this way, has an initiative to end mass incarceration and hopes to end our incarceration rate by 50%. She'll tell us more about that. But first of all, Jessica, thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for having me on.
And before we go any further, did I get the mission of Cut 50 right, or did I mangle it?
No, you got that right. We're a national bipartisan initiative to end mass incarceration and to make our communities safer.
Okay, and you co-founded this with Van Jones, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So I'm a criminal defense attorney by trade. Van is also an attorney. But about 2.5 years ago, we got together and started talking about criminal justice reform. I came to it from a very personal place, having had my husband incarcerated for his drug abuse. So after he served 3.5 years, I decided to become public defender and begin working to make sure that families like mine weren't ripped apart by the state. Van came to this also from a personal place and an academic place, having formed Police Watch and the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. And we decided together that this problem of mass incarceration was created by policies passed on both sides of the aisle and championed by people on both sides of the aisle. So we needed to come up with a way to make everybody work together to get us out of the mess of mass incarceration.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Jessica, that you and Van both, that this problem was created in a bipartisan manner, and that there was a lot of folklore associated with it, and politicking and super predators and all sorts of terms you heard that led up to, the Violent Crime Control Act of the 1990s and so on. Now, you've said, and I have heard elsewhere, that your group wants to take a bipartisan approach to addressing the problem as well, which sounds good. But is that really possible to do in this polarized political environment right now?
Listen, I'm not going to say it won't be difficult, but it's certainly possible. We've already seen historic reforms passed in states with red governors. Look at Georgia. Look at Florida. Tallahassee, city of Tallahassee was the first place to pass ban the box, and that was under a Republican governor. We've seen in Texas, they've taken steps forward in terms of juvenile justice and looking at how they deal with recidivism. We've also seen here in California, we've taken steps forward with Prop 57, Prop 47 here, both of which are bringing home people who have been incarcerated. So both aisles are working to fix this. Both aisles have an incentive to. I think a lot of people assume because it's a human issue, it's a moral issue that affects people on such a personal level that only Democrats would want to work on it. But what we've seen is, people come to this issue from many, many perspectives, and Republicans especially, who care about, being able to balance a budget. Corrections is eating up a huge portion of the budget in each state and the federal government. People who care about not having large government bureaucracies that lack transparency and accountability. People who want to see us invest in programs that work, not programs that fail 74% of the time. And of course, evangelicals who believe that everybody has a right to redemption and second chances. And what we're doing right now is not making it easier for people who are coming home to succeed, but instead placing all sorts of barriers and challenges in their way so that it becomes more difficult to succeed.
Meaning, of course, how the system works now. And you mentioned Ban the Box, which is an initiative to ban the box where people check on a job application that they've been in prison, right? to make it easier to re-enter the workforce. So really, this problem now, you guys are called Cut 50, and we'll talk about that in a second. Meaning, I assume cut the incarceration population or population of incarcerated people, but it's a two-sided problem, isn't it, Jessica? Because we have the problem of people currently in prison, then we have the problem of returning those people, mainstreaming them back into society when they leave prison, so that they don't go back, and also as another humane and just and reasonable thing to do. So, is it possible to tease those two subjects out maybe and talk first about how to reduce? They're obviously interwoven, but how would you go about reducing the population of incarcerated people in this country?
Absolutely. And I'll say there's three different stages that Cut 50 looks at this problem. There's the pretrial issue, there's the sentencing issues, who's actually being sent into prisons and jails, and then there's reentry, and what are we doing to support people when they come home and actually set them up for success so that they have opportunities to contribute and become contributing members of society. So, looking at the very first issue, the pretrial issue, Cut 50 is now working on bail reform here in the state of California. We know firsthand that even just the process of being arrested and held in a jail can be extremely disruptive to somebody's life. Just even not being able to go to work for a week, you can lose your job. Not having a job, then you lose your housing. People have lost custody of their children just by being held in pretrial detention. And all of that is before somebody's even been convicted of a crime. You're setting them up to fail upon reentry. It sounds like maybe it would be a small problem, but there's actually over 450,000 people across the country who are in pretrial detention.
Well, that's a staggering figure. Just to stop for a second before we go on, you're talking about nearly 500,000 people who are imprisoned without having been convicted of doing anything wrong. Do we know why? I mean, might be people in this conversation who in their youth were arrested and never held in detention, but do we know why some people are held in detention? I think I know the answer, but you're the expert. Why some people fall into this state of being held in pretrial detention and others do not?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's an economic reason. It's not based on whether or not they're going to be a flight risk. It's not based on whether or not they're a danger to the community. It's based on whether or not they can afford to post their bail. So when you get arrested, oftentimes there is a bail set by a judge at your pretrial arraignment. That bail can be exorbitant. I've seen bails of $50,000 for a simple property crime, simple property theft. And the person then has to either come up with the full amount or go to the county and put up their house or another piece of property to match that amount, or they have to go to a bail bondsman. Everybody's seen them. You drive around by your courthouse, you see the neon flashing lights saying bail bondsman. They're the guys you call in the middle of the night. You get picked up for a DUI or whatnot. And what they do is they put up, in exchange for you paying them 10% of the fee, they put up the entire bond. The problem with the bail bondsman industry is that you don't get that 10% back. So if I've got a $10,000 bond, I have to give them $1,000 and I'm not going to get that money back. So obviously their system runs particularly well. The way they make money is the higher the bail, the higher the percentage that they're going to collect and keep. And I don't think I would surprise you if I told you they have very effective lobbyists and associations across the country.
That's really interesting. I knew that the bail system was unfair, and I knew that when you put up, when you use a bail bondsman, you don't get your money back. But I had not thought about the lobbying angle of it. So for one thing, one of the big problems with our criminal justice system is that it's economically unfair. I mean, it's a kind of servitude in a way, isn't it? That even if I'm not guilty of anything, if the judge puts $50,000 bail on me, I got to lose $5,000 no matter what, right?
Right, exactly. Or you got to sit there and wait until your trial happens, which, here in California, you can pull time and go to trial after 60 days. But a lot of the time, if you're relying on a public defender or even on a private attorney, it's going to take longer than that to get together the evidence that you need and to be able to present a solid case. So you're looking at sitting in jail for several months at least. If you can't put up that money. And of course, nobody wants to be able to do that. You suffer all sorts of collateral consequences from spending that time in jail. Like I said, loss of home, loss of job, loss of custody, and loss of income. So it can create some real problems, like you said, even if you weren't guilty of any crime.
Yeah, and again, we're talking with Jessica Jackson Sloan, National Director of Cut 50. So, yeah, and I, as you're talking, Jessica, I'm thinking of the surveys that have shown that most American households would not be able to face a $400 emergency.
Exactly.
So imagine how devastating this is. Okay, so there's the bond problem, and you said it was 3 parts. What's the second part?
So the second part is sentencing reform. Currently, we have a one-size-fits-all solution to any crime that's committed, right? If you steal a lawnmower, you're going to jail. If you committed DUI, you're going to jail. If you have mental illness that you're suffering from and it causes a mental health crisis in which a crime is committed, you're going to jail. None of these problems are actually being solved by the solution. So what we need to do is we need to actually start solving the underlying reason people are committing crimes. We need drug courts. We need mental health courts. We need veterans courts to help people who are coming home from the service and having a hard time reintegrating. We need these courts, and these would not be criminal courts. These are diverted courts. To help link people up with the services they need, whether that's rehabilitation or counseling or job opportunities, and help them start solving these underlying crimes or underlying reasons for their crimes, as opposed to just throwing them in a box and not offering them any help.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here, Jessica, and say that whatever the cost of that process would be, the cost would be saved. Aside from it being the right thing to do, the cost would be saved, I'm going to guess, many times over by the savings in incarceration and other expenses that the public has to bear. Okay, and I guess the third piece is reintegrating people back into society. Also, by the way, you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't you guys also hoping that President Obama will do some commutations before he leaves office?
We are. So our Clemency Now campaign kicked off about 6 months ago, calling on the president to issue clemency to those who are eligible under the criteria that his Department of Justice set 2 years ago. So in 2014, the Department of Justice said, if you are in a federal prison, which is about 200,000 people, and you have committed a single offense, a drug crime, you have no violent history in your record, not even in your time in prison. You've been in here at least 10 years, and your sentence would have been different had you been sentenced today. We will grant you clemency.
And what would be the total population affected if the president did that?
So it's hard to tell. We're not quite sure what that would be, but it's several thousand people. So they've seen an import of folks sending in clemency petitions. And I'll just point out on the humanitarian side of this announcement gave a lot of people hope. It gave people who had no hope of getting out before their sentences were done hope that they were going to come home to their families. They weren't going to miss any more Christmases. They weren't going to miss any more birthdays, any more grandchildren being born. They were going to get to come home. So they began to file those clemency petitions. And what we've seen is that the White House just simply did not allocate the right resources to be able to process these petitions. And in some cases, we've seen people who otherwise met the criteria get denials, and really no explanation for why. So we're calling on the president to step it up and issue more clemencies and to actually now, before the new administration comes in, issue categorical clemency to anybody who meets these criteria.
Well, it's certainly something very much worth doing. Where can people go to find out more and offer their support?
www.cut50.org is our website. You can follow us on Twitter as well at cut_50. And we're on Facebook as well. We've got our Clemency Now campaign going on. We just brought 75 families to DC for a vigil. We gave the Department of Justice a 2,000 signature or 2 million signature petition asking for clemency for these people who meet the criteria. And we actually held a beautiful event in partnership with Google that's available online to showcase some of the stories and talk to the family members of people who have been directly impacted by their loved one being incarcerated.
Well, thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming on the program. Thanks for all your great work. Jessica Jackson Sloan, National Director of Cut 50, and maybe we'll talk again sometime about the global issue. I have a sneaking feeling that between drug treatment and mental health treatment and economic parity and so on, we could cut our prison population by a lot more than 50.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks again, Jessica, for coming on the program.
Thank you.
And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.